Next, the stolen election of 2004. After Florida 2000, Al Gore's corporate Democrats, while still screaming at Nader, tolerated no talk of stripped voter rolls, flipped vote counts, gerrymandered districts, or the future of the Electoral College. The rickety, corrupt, totally hackable, by Russians or otherwise, American electoral system muddled into the new millennium full of holes. In 2002, the GOP-controlled Congress filched public billions for electronic voting machines. They were, said Texas Observer editor Ronnie Duggar, quote, devices perfectly designed to steal elections, unquote. Passionately promoted by Ohio Congressman Bob Ney, who later went to prison, direct recorded entry, or DRE, touchscreen voting machines, produced no usable paper trail or public accountability. Courts hid their so-called proprietary source codes. Push and pray became the American way to vote. In 2004, Karl Rove boasted that we'd never rejected a war president. Bush won the apparent popular vote by some 3 million ballots over the latest corporate Democrat, John Kerry. But the Electoral College all came down to Ohio. Walden Odell, the owner of the Canton-based Diebold Electronic Voting Machine Company, had already pledged to re-elect Bush. And why not? The election was being conducted on Odell's very own machines. GOP Secretary of State J. Kenneth Blackwell ran the election while at the same time co-chairing Ohioans to re-elect Bush Cheney. Blackwell stripped some 300,000 likely Democrats from urban voter rolls, with no comparable purges occurring in rural Republican areas. Blackwell eliminated inner-city precincts, published wrong street addresses for those that remained, and denied those inner-city precincts voting machines and backup paper ballots. He sent out thousands of official letters warning alleged ex-felons not to vote. But few of those who got those letters were actually ex-felons, and Ohio had no law against ex-felons voting. Election day lines in African-American precincts and in the lefty town of Oberlin stretched to 5 hours. They were 12 hours at Gambier's liberal Kenyon College. Statewide, the average white Ohioan voted in less than 5 minutes. For a black Ohioan, it took more than 50. Legally mandated Spanish-speaking poll workers never showed up at many Toledo area precincts. Thousands of absentee ballots went unsent. Many of those that were omitted Kerry's name. Scantron ballots in Democratic precincts jammed, failed, couldn't be read. Voters pressing Kerry's name on electronic touchscreens saw it disappear, or bushes would light up. Rural precincts counted more votes than voters. One county near Cincinnati called an unexplained Homeland Security alert, confiscated the ballots, and then, with 2 neighboring counties, gave Bush his margin of victory in Ohio and the nation. Late election night, CNN showed Kerry winning Ohio, and thus the Electoral College, by 4.2%, a 200,000-plus vote margin. But then, in the wee hours of the morning, the count inexplicably stopped. Michael Connell, a Bush family IT expert, had a no-bid contract from Blackwell to count Ohio's votes. His servers were in a Tennessee basement, right next to those of Karl Rove and the Republican National Committee. In the deep night, some 300,000 votes migrated from Kerry to Bush, giving Shrub a 2.5% victory and 4 more years. Nationwide, exit polls in 10 swing states showed Kerry getting significantly more votes than his final official tally, a virtual statistical impossibility. Ohio, Iowa, Nevada, and New Mexico all shifted in the deep night from Kerry to Bush. On heavily Democratic New Mexico indigenous reservations, so-called beheaded ballots somehow lacked a marking for president. It would happen again in Michigan, 2016. Early the next day, the day after the election, with more than 250,000 Ohio ballots still uncounted, Bush's official margin was less than 119,000 votes. The presidency still hung in the balance. Kerry's vice presidential candidate, North Carolina Senator John Edwards, demanded that Kerry not concede. But he quit anyway. Then John Kerry went windsurfing. A mere dozen years later, he quietly vented his suspicion that maybe the 2004 election was stolen. In January 2005, without Al Gore to block them, as he did to the Black Caucus over Florida in 2001, Cleveland Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs Jones and California Senator Barbara Boxer challenged Ohio's Electoral College delegation on the floor of Congress. In the ensuing King-Lincoln-Bronzeville lawsuit, federal judge Algernon Marbley ordered all of Ohio's ballot materials delivered to a repository in Columbus. By the way, I was a plaintiff in this suit. But of Ohio's 88 counties, 56 reported their election materials illegally missing or destroyed. One election board blamed a spilled coffee urn on the ruined ballots. Another said the ballots were accidentally recycled. Thus, in the election that decided the U.S. presidency in 2004, there was never a comprehensive recount, nor were there any indictments for the 56 counties worth of missing federal ballot materials. To this day, some 90,000 ballots remain uncounted. In 2008, Michael Connell, the Bush family's prime IT specialist, who was in charge of the 2004 vote count, was put under federal subpoena. In the midst of testifying about what really happened in Ohio 2004, he, like Paul Wellstone, died in a mysterious private plane crash. Next, the Katrina Abu Ghraib outrage. In August 2005, the global warmed Category 5 Hurricane Katrina tore into New Orleans with 170-mile-an-hour winds. It was all about global warming. Had NOLA's wetlands and levees been rightly maintained at a cost of about $5 billion, some 1,800 humans might not have died. Some $100 billion in damages might have been avoided. Instead, bloated American corpses floated through the Big Easy's mostly black wards. Thousands who fled for safety to the Saints Superdome endured deadly, degrading filth for days at a time. Meanwhile, President W. could not be bothered to visit New Orleans in person. Instead, he, quote, inspected the devastated community by looking out his window as Air Force One flew over. Then he praised FEMA Director Michael Brown for doing a so-called heck of a job. Bush's mother, Barbara, gushed that these so-called fortunate refugees who'd lost everything could now enjoy her beloved Texas. Shrub later vetoed Democratic attempts to extend health care for children. But his signature moments came with torture, sexual abuse, religious defamation, and random murder at Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, and other imperial hellholes. Seymour Hersh, who broke the My Lai story, and too many watchdog groups have confirmed an official sadism explicitly approved by War Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. So-called patriot draft dodgers like Vice President Cheney and hate talker Rush Limbaugh embraced torture for its own sake. Fatal beatings of innocent humans who were rarely charged or convicted of anything mocked common decency, but seemed perfectly fine with this new fundamentalist breed of visible GOP saints. In December 2006, the CIA had its once faithful, oil-bearing puppet, Saddam, abused and hanged. While Bush-Cheney Rove crowed about a victory for so-called democracy in Iraq, that poor country sank into ghastly chaos and endless war. The collapse of the post-Saddam state left the public impoverished and terrorized. The nation's priceless museums and fragile countryside were raped and ruined. Meanwhile, the Bush regime's sadistic, we can do anything abuse in Iraq and Afghanistan went viral. At Abu Ghraib in Iraq, hideous visuals showed smiling U.S. soldiers dog-collaring prisoners, piling them up naked, forcing them into sodomy, torturing them with electrodes, and desecrating their religion. W's brass cited so-called national defense and blamed so-called bad apple miscreants for the global horror show. But the images of a so-called Christian military in deranged decline evoked universal horror, heartbreak, outrage, and shame. Shrub's popularity shriveled. So did an economy reeling from imperial overreach and the triumvirate's gilded greed. The Clintons had already shredded Glass-Steagall and FDR's regulatory firewall. Team Bush threw in tax cuts and easements for crony banks now so-called too big to fail. Free to pillage, the corporate elite gorged at the public trough. Its clown posse of bad mortgages, pyramid schemes, derivatives, and other fiscal scams deepened the chasm between the rich and the rest of us. In 2007-9, these baronial geniuses crashed us into America's worst recession since 1929. To see it on film, look at The Big Short, Heist, The Smartest Guys in the Room, Inside Job. Shrub departed with modern history's lowest ratings, at least until Trump. Our second boomer CEO shredded our embrittled Constitution. He left us a ravaged economy, endless war, a dying ecosphere, education in chaos, our beloved New Orleans in despair, public torture, global shame, fake elections, shredded civil rights and liberties, all of them under constant attack, and even more. Thus, George W. Bush cleared the path for our first black president, who was, of course, expected to clean up the mess. Next, Obama and the crash of so-called too big to fail. Reagan, Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, wrote a blank check to America's so-called too big to fail oligarchs. Barack Obama sealed the deal. The empire's executive salaries soared hundreds of times beyond the average working wage. Our national wealth gushed into the pockets of what the Occupy movement called the 1%. A Midas cast of uncaring corporatists looted our public assets. Federal Reserve Chair Alan Greenspan's, quote, "greed is good" ethos. That phrase was immortalized in Oliver Stone's Wall Street. Became America's Ayn Randian mantra. Any real regulation or royal restraint virtually vanished. In the Reagan 80s, casino reptilians like Michael Milken, Ivan Boesky, and Donald Trump made and blew epic fortunes. The savings and loan industry disintegrated at a public cost of untold billions. Baronial jail time went from slim to none. Goldman Sachs's Robert Rubin had ruled the Clinton 90s. Corporate Dems once again trashed the unions and the working middle class that put them in power. Except for their hipster veneer, the Clintonistas shapeshifted into rich Republicans. As our national engine leapt to high tech and the internet, NAFTA and our gutted industrial core crushed the working middle class. Malignant neglect drove once prosperous industrial meccas like Gary, Detroit, and Flint to the depths of despair. In 2008, the concentration of ever more wealth into the pockets of a tiny insider cabal finally blew us into the abyss. As Bill and W barbecued regulation, the billionaire-elect used a mighty array of fakes and fraud to fry the system. In 1999 to 2001, they deregulated electric utilities. Digital thieves like Bush crony Kenny Boyle's Enron blacked out whole regions. Then, of course, they went bankrupt, ruining millions. Wholly owned legislatures in California and Ohio deregulated a utility system being made obsolete by wind and solar. More than $100 billion in grifted bailouts dug our dying atomic reactor fleet deeper into decrepitude. In 2003, a crumbling infrastructure shorted the Northeast's nuke-based grid, blacking out 50 million people. The guilty Ohio utility kept running its increasingly dangerous atomic reactors, went bankrupt, and grabbed billions in state bailouts. Then came the coup de grace. Those trillions in stolen public assets finally tripped the panic button on the worst collapse since 1929. Subprime mortgages, empty derivatives, deregulated grids, all those con jobs came home to roost. In the summer-fall of 2008, as the presidential campaign raged, the feds put the giant Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac mortgage agencies into conservatorship. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. Merrill Lynch was fire-saled to Bank of America for $50 billion. The Fed handed an $85 billion loan to the insurance company AIG. The stock market crumbled. Investors fled to Treasury bills. It was a great crash, déjà vu, all over again. On October 3rd, 2008, Congress approved W's Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. Its Troubled Asset Relief Program had $7 billion to give so-called too-big-to-fail banks to keep them from going under. But there was zero money for our too-small-to-matter working middle class, who lost their savings, jobs, homes, cars, futures. A month later, Barack Obama won the presidency. He was born in Hawaii, August 4th, 1961. His mother was from Kansas. His father was from Kenya. Exceptionally charismatic, a brilliant speaker, and a consummate showman, Barack was not descended from slaves, but his wife Michelle was, and was suitably proud of it. Their telegenic aplomb lit up our ever-evolving, permanently awakened Social Democrat core. When Obama nailed an in-your-face three-point shot at a live event in Kuwait, his destiny seemed manifest. He got to run against John McCain. The Arizona senator postured as a maverick Republican and as an aging corporate warhorse. His choice of Alaska Governor Sarah Palin for a running mate was patently insane. A female GOP vice president should have been a stroke of genius, but to even many Republicans, Sarah seemed an incompetent, mean-spirited airhead. Spewing absurdities, she was a shaky backup for the no-spring chicken McCain. Palin did fire up an angry, hateful right wing that loved her down-home verve. For the likes of Donald Trump, she was a radioactive icebreaker. Obama's diverse, diffuse hope and change demographics inspired an army of grassroots activists, old and new. With pivotal mastery of Facebook and other social media, Obama excited a reborn New Deal dynamic, raising millions of dollars in small donations, but also taking some pretty big corporate ones. On Election Day, Barack's awakened enthusiasts fought stripped voter rolls, brought souls to the polls, challenged rigged electronic tallies, and blocked Florida 2000, Ohio 2004 from happening again. When Obama claimed victory in Chicago's Grant Park, where Dick Daley's crazed cops beat the hell out of us 40 years before, baby boomer tears flowed like liberated rain. It was a watershed moment, a giant leap for American diversity. That Trumpster bigots spent 8 years obsessing over Barack's birth certificate confirmed the might of a black president with his wife, 2 kids, and mother-in-law running the White House. And run it they did. Dating to George and Martha, Barack and Michelle managed as tight and clean an executive ship as any in our history. They beautifully raised their 2 daughters at the edge of the public eye. Their internal operation was scandal and indictment-free. With charm, grace, and wit, so-called no-drama Obama was calm and cool enough to pass for a hologram. At the grassroots, Michelle was a fine Eleanor Update. Her wit, charm, and boundless energy became a warm spring rain. Like those lost happy days, hope and change seemed here again. But actual policy was another story. Endowed with astounding charisma and unique administrative abilities, Obama had the Clinton-esque ability to project an aura of caring progressivism while enacting policies that were anything but. Like Tom Jefferson, the brilliant, enigmatic, pot-smoking constitutional law professor was a cacophony of contradiction, an army of asterisks. Obama's inconsistent presidency evoked a turbulent mix of adoration, confusion, and contempt from both left and right. Its failure to solve our economic crisis at the trampled grassroots ultimately empowered a catastrophic successor. The financial collapse of 2007-9 was rooted in the escalating gap between rich and poor. Average overall American wages had risen steadily from Jefferson to Nixon. Then they went and stayed stale. The post-Vietnam era saw zero major legislation to benefit the working middle class. Said Yale professor Timothy Snyder in The Road to Unfreedom, quote, "In 1978, the top 0.1% of the population, about 160,000 families, controlled 7% of American wealth. A family in the top 0.01%, about 16,000 families, was about 222 times as rich as the average American family. By 2012, such a family was about 1,120 times richer. America's 99% was desperate. The safety net was shredded. Since 1980, wrote Snyder, quote, 90% of the American population had gained essentially nothing, either in wealth or income. All gains have gone to the top 10%, and within the top 10%, most to the top 1%, and within the top 1%, most to the top 0.1%, and within the top 0.1%, most to the 0.01%. In 1933, FDR confronted the super-rich, who in turn conspired to kill him. In retaliation, he birthed the awakened drama and organic leaps of the first New Deal. Railing at malefactors of great wealth, Roosevelt built a regulatory infrastructure that prevented, for 80 years, the next catastrophe. His programs protected the working middle class. They put a Keynesian floor on the bottom-up demand that guaranteed a stable economy. Unemployment insurance, Social Security, food stamps, public works, eco-tree planting, and much, much more helped ensure that basic human needs would be funded and that this bottom-up demand would keep the economy going. As he took office in 2009, progressives who'd worked so hard to elect Barack Obama expected him to do many of the same things that FDR had done. The Democrats won a 257 to 178 margin in the House. They held 60 U.S. Senate seats for 4 months and were over 55 for 2 full years. The world seemed at the new president's feet. The system seemed ready to be made. The media filled with obituaries for a GOP they said was all but dead, which it was, but not in ways they fully understood, as Donald Trump would soon prove. Obama now faced Schwab's financial miasma. Bush's troubled asset relief program seemed the pinnacle of American lemon socialism. As usual, the working middle class got stuck with the free market larceny of the obscenely rich. As Noam Chomsky put it, quote, "A basic principle of modern state capitalism is that costs and risks are socialized to the extent possible. while profit is privatized. In 2009, as the rest of TARP's ransom money poured into their pockets, Wall Street's billionaires feared that this new so-called populist president might demand justice and remake the regulatory backstop. His so-called New Deal would at least threaten to bring parity and justice to the millions below the baronial bar. But Obama did none of the above. Barack filled his administration with Wall Street insiders like Robert Rubin, Tim Geithner, and Larry Summers. Trillions vanished. Billions were grifted. Millions of homes lost their jobs and incomes. Yet no Wall Streeters went to jail, except for one obscure number cruncher that they carted off for ritual sacrifice. Minor limits were put on some salaries. Only Shearson went bankrupt, and the new president in the White House held his tongue. As Thomas Frank put it, Barack met with the banking community in March 2009 and, quote, after warning them about the pitchforks of an angry public, Obama reassured the frightened bankers that they could count on him to protect them, that he had no intention of restructuring their industry or changing the economic direction of the nation, unquote. Right then and there, the hope drained out of the Obama movement. Any Corp Dem claim to being a party of change died on the spot. Franklin and Eleanor flipped in their graves. Obama did open with the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, overturning a Supreme Court decision that had limited the clock for employees to challenge pay discrimination. Obama followed by funding ARPA-E, actually initiated by Bush too, to push advanced energy research. Then came the stimulus package, a monument to American post-imperial recovery. It was missing the Roosevelts' regulatory wrath, as well as their alphabet agencies and promotional passion. It was certainly not Gene Debs's democratic socialism, demanding public ownership of the means of production, including the banks, guarantees for those at the bottom, universal health care, an ocean of public works, an end to poverty, war, and so much more. And what was there got relentlessly hammered by Just Say No Republicans, who were allied with corporate blue dog Democrats, determined at all costs to make sure Obama failed. But Barack's stimulus package was the undersold embryo of the epic groundswell that became the Green New Deal. It embraced a sweeping vision of what a 21st century economy needed to survive and thrive. It embodied serious leaps in renewable energy, infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc., education, affordable housing, help for vets and the homeless, ecological restoration, high-tech breakthroughs, computerized medicine, tax breaks for the working middle class, and much, much more. President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton helped save Paris climate accords that China might have derailed. Their own EPA pushed a clean power plan to reduce CO2 emissions, primarily from coal. The FHA's hardest hit fund saved thousands from eviction. The stimulus package did make a difference. In a sane social democrat society, it should have easily been 2, 3, 4 times bigger. But charismatic though he was, no drama Obama lacked FDR's mainstream touch. There were no exciting alphabet agencies, no massive public arts projects, no grassroots embrace or feel your pain angst, no happy days are here again, which actually had been a stimulus agent of its own. Like the Clintons, Obama would not seriously discuss a single-payer national health care plan. Medicare for all was not in Barack Obama's hope and change playbook until he was out of power, trying to roll back the Trumpocalypse he'd helped ignite. He did win Obamacare, which had a huge saving impact on millions of Americans and the general economy. But in the public eye, Obamacare was corporate, complex, and incomplete. For the hateful GOP, it was a socialist apparition. For the grassroots left, it just wasn't the Medicare for all that made so much more long-term sense. It didn't help that Rahm Emanuel, Barack's chief of staff and congressional enforcer, came with a Dick Cheney sneer and endless contempt for working middle-class Americans and their activist advocates. Obama's elite demeanor was engraved in a taped condescension toward so-called bitter citizens who cling to guns and religion in times of need. Most of all, the Obama package simply didn't penetrate deep enough into the daily agony of the overstretched grassroots. Virtually every dollar of new wealth created since TARP, stimulus, and Obama has gone straight to the top 0.1%. As they had since Jimmy Carter, even with control of the presidency and both houses of Congress, the corporate Democrats produced not enough of lasting value to bring peace to the increasingly desperate working middle class. Much TARP money did eventually come back to the government. The car companies stayed in business. The global economy did not immediately fly into the abyss, at least not for those on top. But the too big to fail elite elect, who profited from their own shipwreck, now escaped in public-funded lifeboats. The rest of us sank or swam. It was ever more socialism for the rich. The Big Short trillions were never repaid by those who trashed the economy and were primed and are still primed to do it again. Likewise, the drug war. Unlike Shrub and Bill, Barack bragged about inhaling both cannabis and cocaine. Quote, "That was the point," he quipped. His federal drug warriors did ease up. See the so-called Cole memo. Many Gulag victims did go free. But in a bad early moment, Obama actually mocked those who expected him, rightfully, to legalize pot. Some 24 states did approve medical marijuana. Colorado, very successfully, legalized it outright. But federal pot busts still continued. Obama also refused a new trial or pardon for indigenous activist Leonard Peltier, whose decades in prison still demand real justice. A constitutional lawyer, Obama hammered government whistleblowers with more arrests than any other president. His iron grip on classified information matched at least that of Reagan and the Bushes. A constitutional lawyer, Obama hammered government whistleblowers with more arrests than any other president. His iron grip on classified information matched at least that of Reagan and the Bushes. Obama's Dreamer program welcomed children of illegal immigrants, but he deported millions of others. Barack paid lip service to climate chaos with some restrictions on fossil fuels. He actually appointed a real regulator, Jeffrey Yazko, to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But his so-called all-the-above energy policy embraced an absurd $8.3 billion loan guarantee for the last two U.S. reactors, now bankrupting Georgia. He waffled on the eco-lethal Keystone and Dakota pipelines until massive indigenous-based opposition forced his hand. He embraced the fracking nightmare, now shredding our air and water. He broke a campaign promise to stop Monsanto's genetically modified organisms from spreading unlabeled. Like so many other corporate Democrats, Obama did little for the unions that strongly supported him. There was no great push for campaign finance reform or for an end to registration stripping, machine flipping, or the Electoral College. When the Kochs grabbed the gerrymandering reins in 2010, Barack noted that he'd, quote, taken a shellacking, but he did little to fight back beyond working for his own reelection. In late 2012, he proposed cutting Social Security benefits through a complex ruse known as the chained CPI. He was stopped by grassroots outrage and a counterattack led by Senator Bernie Sanders and Joel Siegel, a staffer for Representative John Conyers. Peddling so-called bipartisanship, Barack and Rahm glad-handed Republicans who trashed all the corporate Democrats proposed while stiffing the green social Democrats who put them in office. Our sinking manufacturing base did not refloat. The minimum wage didn't jump. Guantanamo didn't shut. College tuitions and student loan debt skyrocketed. Whistleblowers were ravaged. Big Pharma ran wild. Millions still lacked health care. The Petronuke cabal poisoned the planet. The blowback was immediate. In February 2009, Chicago TV face Rick Santelli falsely labeled the too-big-to-fail bailout as a handout to low-income Americans, read blacks, Hispanics, who'd signed bad mortgages. The public billions, of course, actually went to rich bankers, but the blame, as always, went to the victims, mostly people of color. The AstroTurf so-called taxed enough already, or Tea Party, drew big corporate cash for the latest divide-and-conquer lynch mob. Wrongly called populists, the Koch-funded New Rightists hated everything the 1890s People's Party platform stood for. In 2011, Obama proposed a pair of landmark American Jobs Act bills, but the Koch GOP now owned a gerrymandered Congress. The 2008-10 window for real social change slammed shut. The Republicans morphed into a fanatic phalanx of pure corporate reaction, focused entirely on hate, wealth, greed, and winning. Overseas, Barack Obama became an imperial warrior. He broke far more than just our hearts. Barack's senatorial vote against the Iraq War helped win him the Democratic nomination from Hillary Clinton, and then the presidency, and then a very premature Nobel Prize. In perhaps the Peace Award's most inappropriate acceptance speech, Obama argued for the necessity of war. Barack spoke passionately about abolishing nuclear weapons. He negotiated a brilliant, very important non-proliferation treaty with Iran, but he actually eliminated fewer warheads than did W. He pushed for a $1 trillion upgrade of our atomic arsenal. He was the first sitting president since Calvin Coolidge to visit Cuba, but Guantanamo's hellish torture chamber stayed open. To the horror of his grassroots backers, Obama extended Shrub's refusal to sign a global ban on landmines, which annually kill countless innocent children. Said fellow Nobel laureate Jody Williams, quote, "This decision is a slap in the face to landmine survivors, their families, and affected communities everywhere." Worst of all, Obama leapt into our imperial, endless war, Afghan sinkhole. Historian Thomas E. Gutierrez lists previous losers in the graveyard of empires as Persia, 500 BC, Alexander the Great, 330 BC, the Kushans, 96 BC, the Sasanians, 200 AD, the Huns, 400, Persians again, 900, Mongols, 1200, India and Persia again, 1550, Great Britain, 1839, Russia, 1850, Great Britain again, 1878, and the Soviet Union, 1978. The new Nobel laureate loudly convened the usual corporate militarists to plot his leap and give it a public sheen. Uninvited were grassroots peace activists who'd been right on Vietnam, right on Central America, right on Iraq, right on Iran, and were right again about the need to stay out of the Afghan quagmire. While withdrawing troops from Iraq in February and December of 2009, Barack sent thousands more to kill and die in Afghanistan. When he executed Osama bin Laden, it was in Pakistan. With zero due process, Obama flung extra-legal drones at so-called suspected terrorists, including at least one U.S. citizen, then his child. Wedding parties, family gatherings, innocent civilians, small children, random villages fell like three-point shots. Like Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam, like Shrub in Iraq, Barack wasted trillions, and he left Afghanistan far worse than he found it. A massive corridor stretching across Southwest Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa devolved into a festering Hades. Ancient Arab, Israeli, Palestinian conflicts deepened and metastasized. Mass slaughter ravaged Syria, Yemen, Jordan, and beyond. Democratic so-called Arab Spring uprisings morphed into tyrannies even worse than those that they overthrew. With Secretary of State Hillary Clinton beating the war drums, Obama facilitated the murder of Libya's Gaddafi. Along the shores of Tripoli, site of Thomas Jefferson's first overseas intervention 2 centuries prior, America's imperial overreach came full circle. Like Saddam, Gaddafi's suicidal sin was to threaten the petrodollar. His gold reserves, maybe 130 tons, could back an all-African currency. He was a terrible, brutal dictator. He was also a secular stopgap against Islamic terror. He warned the West of what was about to happen. Quote, "Now listen, you people of NATO, you're bombing a wall which stood in the way of African migration to Europe and in the way of al-Qaeda terrorists. This wall was Libya. You're breaking it. You're idiots, and you will burn in hell for thousands of migrants from Africa." Unquote. Sure enough, Libya devolved into a failed, barbaric, Iraq-like state. Thousands died. Thousands more fled to a Europe completely unready for them. They lit a desperate human firestorm that still threatens another race-based fascist nightmare. In Honduras, near the halls of Montezuma, Obama and Clinton undercut the duly elected progressive Manuel Zelaya. They backed the usual thugs in another deadly round of dollar diplomacy's forever war on social democracy. As in so many other Latin fiefdoms, Honduras sank into the murderous morass of corporate dictatorship, feeding the flow of desperate refugees that Donald Trump would soon use as a pretext for American autocracy. In 2009 and 2010, Obama appointed Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor to the Supreme Court. In 2015, they joined a 5-4 majority, supporting the right to gay marriage. The swing voter was San Francisco's Justice Anthony Kennedy, who would soon retire. Across the nation, millions of loving humans celebrated an awakened breakthrough. Then, uber-corporatist Antonin Scalia passed away. Scalia was the Supreme's primary proponent of so-called constitutional originalism, whereby baronial conservatives conjured imaginary thoughts allegedly channeled from the Founding Fathers to justify anti-human edicts that invariably favored large corporations and the Calvinist elect. Led by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the hard-right GOP stonewalled Obama's replacement nomination of the moderate Merrick Garland, along with scores of other judicial nominees. As the 2016 election approached, the fate of our federal government and our future on this planet hung in the balance. Next, the Golden State and the Great Immigration. In the new millennium, immigration remade the face of U.S. politics. California became our great green 800-pound gorilla. From the 1920s, Hollywood was our silver screen mecca, America's la-la field of dreams. In the 1930s, the Golden State absorbed the era's great Okie migration and spawned its primal literary epic, Grapes of Wrath. It very nearly elected our first socialist governor, Upton Sinclair, author of The Jungle. It hosted the elder-based grassroots Townsend movement that birthed Social Security. Republican Governor Earl Warren, 1943 to 53, became our uber-liberal Chief Justice, 1953 to 1969, godfather to the monumental Brown versus Board of Education desegregation decision, and many more like it. Orange County simultaneously spawned Richard Nixon. In the 1960s, the Stanford CIA experiments with LSD put the merry pranksters on their magic bus. The Bay Area became the epicenter of the new left hippie counterculture. The grape and lettuce fields of the Central Valley yielded Cesar Chavez, the pioneer, Thoreau, Gandhi, King field organizer with Dolores Huerta of our movement for Hispanic rights. In the Rainbow 70s and early 80s, Governor Jerry Moonbeam Brown launched thousands of wind turbines and the Solartopian trek to a green-powered Earth. Silicon Valley birthed the personal computer and World Wide Web. Hollywood produced the Reagans. By the 1990s, modern America's greatest demographic shift was in full swing. Human waves from South and Central America and the Caribbean remade the demographics of swing states stretching across the former Spanish territories of Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, and California. That so many of Hispanic origin were merely moving back into the lands taken by force from Mexico in 1848 didn't seem to register on those who railed against them. The California influx was joined by refugees from the Pacific Islands and Asia, including our imperial victims in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Los Angeles hosted the world's second largest Spanish-speaking population, behind Mexico City, ahead of Madrid. Longtime rightist Southern California morphed into a green-leaning mosaic. LA looked to become the world's first solartopian megalopolis. Renewable activists pushed a statewide shift towards wind and solar. Silicon Valley's Elon Musk conjured electric cars, rooftop solar panels, private rockets. His revolution in battery production was joined by billionaire LA Times owner Patrick Soon-Shiong, who favored nickel over lithium. With 12% of the U.S. population, California claimed more people than all but 40 of the world's countries, including Canada, and became the world's sixth largest economy, leading an epic techno-ethnic transformation. California became the second state after Hawaii, whose whites were in the minority. Many weren't pleased. Their momentary messiah was San Diego Mayor Pete Wilson, who ran for governor in 1994 against Catherine Brown, Jerry's sister. Pete Wilson's Trumpian assault on Hispanic immigrants got him a term in Sacramento and then in the U.S. Senate. But his bigoted putsch soured the state's Hispanics on the California GOP. In 1999, they helped make former Brown aide Gray Davis governor of the state. Boring, bland, and bureaucratic, Davis was quickly blindsided by the great Enron catastrophe. Governor Wilson had deregulated electric power. His so-called free market bailouts handed billions in so-called stranded cost scams to dying reactors and crony e-thieves. When they blacked out the state, Davis sued to take back Enron's ill-got gains. That was the corporate imperial equivalent of Saddam or Gaddafi threatening the petrodollar. The baronial right immediately struck back with the one thing that never fails in California, a Hollywood celebrity. This time, it was Arnold Terminator Schwarzenegger, the pumped-up Austrian immigrant. The macho cult hero blew Davis away in a trumped-up recall. Once enthroned in Sacramento, Schwarzenegger killed all attempts to reclaim Enron's stolen billions. He also deepened the state's economic chaos. A social moderate, married to a Kennedy, he left California and its GOP in a smoldering ruin. But the Arnold did help win a critical electoral reform. California was completely gerrymandered. Ruling corporate Democrat Republicans regularly conspired to protect their safe seats. Competitive elections in California did not exist. But in 2008, Schwarzenegger helped push a landmark statewide referendum, Prop 11, establishing a citizens' commission to administer state legislative districts along bi/nonpartisan lines. A remarkably transparent process let representatives of the two parties and general public draw representative districts to serve actual communities rather than lifetime incumbents. In 2010, voters added in the state's congressional districts. Unified primaries forced candidates who came in first and second to compete in the general elections, even if they were from the same party. Entrenched Democrats, like San Francisco Representative Nancy Pelosi, who in 2000 became the first female U.S. House Speaker, fought against Prop 11. But had she pushed it nationwide, her doomed Democrats might have ducked the red map coup that was about to crush them. Next, the 2010 white supremacist red map cross-check coup. As the Democrats won the demographic shift in our Golden State, a black man won the White House. Barack Obama's 2008 presidential victory was above all a triumph for America's shifting demographic. The white new right was terrified and took immediate action. In 2010, its red map cross-check coup made Jim Crow the law of the land. Citizens United was the key. By a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court on January 20th, 2010, formally granted full human personhood to our ruling corporations. Their guaranteed human rights came with no human responsibilities. Big money could now openly buy our elections and our government. The ruling was rooted in the 1877 Santa Clara Railway court log, where a clerk enshrined corporate personhood based on alleged closed-door discussions the justices may or may not have had. A century later, in Buckley, 1976, and Bellotti, 1978, Lewis Powell's baronial majority killed congressional attempts to limit campaign corporate spending. Further unleashed by the 2010 Citizens United and 2012 McCutcheon decrees, baronial cash swamped our elections. But there was much, much more. As Obama skated through his early presidency, Koch-financed operatives shape-shifted the gerrymandering process to produce a devastating wall of steel. The red map coup became, as per David Daley's infamous expose, the great American RATF ... Starting in the 1970s, the billionaire Koch brothers used what Jane Mayer has called dark money to superfund a nasty horde of Randian so-called thinkers. Their American Legislative Exchange Council infected academia and the media with the autocratic gospel of corporate contempt. Pounding the monopolized Foxist airwaves, these new Calvinists bankrolled an evangelical juggernaut. Their Puritan priesthood solemnly sanctified million-dollar estates, fat cat luxury cars, and flashy Rolex watches as sure signs of heavenly election. Armed with Citizens United, GOP strategists Chris Jankowski, Ed Gillespie, and Karl Rove used Koch cash to harvest state governments. The every 10 years redistricting process was computerized into a hyper-gerrymandered red map with which the GOP flipped about 1,000 federal, state, and local seats from blue to red, no matter what the voters actually wanted. In Ohio, for example, Obama and U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown won popular 2008 statewide majorities. But in 2010, the GOP grabbed 12 of Ohio's 16 gerrymandered congressional seats, plus supermajorities in both houses of the state legislature. In state after state, the coup went viral. In those 2010 midterms, the Dems took what Obama glibly called a shellacking. Koch money swung a 250 to 178 blue Democratic U.S. House majority to a 242 to 193 red-mapped GOP majority. The Republicans also picked up 6 U.S. Senate seats. The corporate Dems responded with no public analysis of what had happened and no coherent plan to reverse it. In 2012, Barack was easily reelected, but beneath him and the Democratic elite, there was no more there. Red Map stuffed urban districts with Democrats who were content to hold their gerrymandered sweet spots. But in 2012, the Supreme's 5-4 McCutcheon decree deepened the GOP's overall death grip on the Congress and state legislatures. In Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, all key in 2016 and elsewhere, the GOP could lose statewide popular votes by substantial margins, but still win gerrymandered congressional delegations and state houses, often with big majorities. In 2013, the Supreme's Shelby decision, again 5-4, gutted LBJ's 1965 Voting Rights Act. That act had protected minorities, mostly, but not solely, in former Confederate states. A re-enshrined Jim Crow now fed an increasingly racist GOP. Meanwhile, Michigan's super-rich Governor Rick Snyder seized emergency control of mostly black-run governments. To enrich crony investors, he switched Flint's water supply from the Great Lakes to the filthy Flint River, poisoning the town with industrial toxins, including lead, ruining lives and destroying families. Obama flew into Flint, see Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 11/9, and then made a show of sipping the river water twice. He did nothing to clean it up. The Koch-funded Republicans also peddled hackable e-voting machines and rigged registration rolls. As reported by Greg Palast, Kansas's Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, used his infamous cross-check program to strip thousands of primarily black and Hispanic citizens from the voter rolls. Our elections became a push-and-pray farce scripted by secret source codes on hackable electronic touchscreens. With a few geeky keystrokes, a University of Michigan IT professor made one e-voting machine sing our famous fight song. A zombie army of reactionary incumbents now took charge of a bought, gerrymandered fortress. Fearing only internal party challenges, GOP incumbents flocked to racism and reaction. The Democrats sank into smug blue dog corporatism. Still ranting at Ralph, still mute about Ohio 2004, still failing the working middle class, still mute about the Koch-Kobach mega gerrymander, the corporate Dem elite, safe in its rigged districts, slept through the red map cross-check coup d'etat. In 2014 to 2016, 6 Democratic U.S. Senate candidates lost to CIA-style hacks, despite exit polls showing them with clear majorities. None of these Democrats challenged the results in their stolen elections. The GOP then stonewalled Obama's court choices and ran Congress with a Jack London iron heel. Meanwhile, the aging Clintonista New Democrats trashed a rising generation of millennial progressives. The party, said Donna Brazile, became Obama and the Clintons' personal plaything. In 2016, Hillary Clinton bought it outright. Then she crowned Donald Trump. Next, the stolen elections of 2016. First, Hillary rips Bernie. The art and science of election theft is as old as the Federalist coup that foisted our Constitution. It peaked in 2016. As Obama sailed through his stylish 2 terms, the Kochs and their cohorts brilliantly deployed their billions. From 2008 to 2016, the GOP's red map coup gave them both houses of Congress, plus scores of governorships and state legislatures, joined by hundreds of supervisors, mayors, school boards, dog catchers, and much more. The Corp Dems withered, says Donna Brazile, who was party chair in 2011 and again in 2016 to 17. Quote, Obama left the party $24 million in debt. His campaign was not scheduled to pay it off until 2016. Hillary had taken care of 80% of the remaining debt in 2016, about $10 million, and had placed the DNC on an allowance. Early in the 2018 primaries, Clinton drew sparse, listless handfuls to boring, uninspired chats that gave no indication why she ran for president, except that it was, quote, her turn, unquote. But the rallies of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders exploded with thousands of wildly enthusiastic young activists, many of them millennials. A self-proclaimed socialist who lionized Gene Debs, Sanders was a professorial veteran of the 1960s New Left. The corporate media avoided his issues, and him, like the plague. In one infamous incident, a major network switched from an impassioned Bernie rant to hundreds of excited activists, away to an empty microphone, awaiting the studiously delayed appearance of Donald Trump. But Bernie's grassroots advocacy unleashed a huge upwelling of public anger and activism. Anonymous cash donations, averaging $27, poured in from an ocean of awakened enthusiasts. Ranting at the, quote, millionaires and billionaires, Bernie demanded economic justice, racial equality, universal health care, a livable minimum wage, union solidarity, gay, feminist, minority rights, eco-harmony, legal cannabis, free community college, student loan forgiveness, protected voter rolls, universal hand-cast, hand-counted paper ballots, a stronger Bill of Rights, and much more. Amidst a horrific police assault against the African American and Hispanic communities, the Sandinistas built on popular resistance to the imperial Afghan-Iraqi wars. They fought the escalating gap between rich and poor. They opposed the corporate assault on our global environment. They fed the grassroots, no nukes, Rainbow, Occupy, Black Lives Mattered, Solartopian groundswell. Polls showed millions, especially millennials, favoring socialism over capitalism. In the 2016 primaries, with all the excitement of a spontaneous, nonviolent revolution, some 13 million Americans gave Bernie a dozen times more votes than Gene Debs got a century before. Stumbling towards its Philadelphia convention, the Democratic National Committee was legally and morally bound to be neutral. But its Clintonista consigliere choked the corporate chatter shows, as well as the voting process. In Brooklyn, where Bernie was raised, more than 100,000 citizens were stripped from the registration rolls. Carefully calculated party restrictions dumped thousands more in California. Raucous state caucuses fell to dubious vote counts and actual coin flips. The convention opened to leaked internal memos showing the game was rigged for Hillary. Facing a raging grassroots prairie fire, party chair Deborah Schultz was forced to resign. Philly's streets did not explode like Dick Daley's Chicago '68, but Sandinista icon Nina Turner of Ohio was blocked from delivering a major petition. Youthful demands for peace and justice were banned from the convention floor. Angry discord filled the hall. As in 1896, 1968, 1980, and 2000, the Democrats attempted flight to the White House, demanded fusing the party's two wings. For Hillary to win, she needed Bernie as VP, or at least she needed to embrace his activist millennial legions, deplorable though she deemed them to be. But in a bad replay of so many failed play-it-safe campaigns before, Hillary's tone-deaf New Dems chose Virginia's very corporate, anti-choice, charisma-free Senator Tim Kaine to be the vice presidential nominee. Back in 1896, William Jennings Bryan had likewise chosen a Maine baker over the Georgia firebrand Tom Watson, stiffing the populists. And the charismatic, not yet a socialist labor leader was in jail and unwilling. In 2016, 12 decades later, Bernie was not in jail, and he was willing. But as with Tom Watson in 1896, and so many others along the way, the regular Democrats contemptuously turned their back on the progressive left. As usual, the party told Bernie and his enthusiastic, issue-oriented, grassroots, millennial supporters to put up and shut up. Despite her hostile opposition to so much of the social democracy that so many of them stood for, Hillary somehow expected these millions of eager activists of all ages to follow her limp leads. She somehow believed that they would fall in line, fill her rallies, pour into the polls, check the registration rolls, guarantee the vote count, swing the Electoral College, knowing that once she got back into the White House, she was virtually certain to once again betray them. The miscalculation was epic. The aftermath was catastrophic. Millennial and progressive passion, of course, chilled to anger, alienation, indifference. Like Humphrey in 1968, Team Clinton fled yet another shattered Democratic National Convention, oblivious to impending doom. Sleepwalking through thin, lifeless rallies, the Clintons' content-free campaign, right to the very end, assumed entitlement to a coming coronation. They were so wrong. Next, then, Trump rips Hillary. While the Clintonistas wallowed in smug complacency, the 2016 GOP staged a runaway reality show gone really wrong. A hideous boor. He was accused by at least 16 women of sexual imposition, including at least one forcible rape. Nonetheless, Donald Trump made fools of the GOP's biggest loser, plutocrats. The 2016 primaries played as farce, then tragedy. Media Meister Donald was born in the fever swamps of organized crime. His grandfather, a German immigrant, was the mobbed-up owner of a California brothel. His racist, Jew-hating father, Fred, openly supported the Ku Klux Klan. The skinflint slumlord was honored with an anthem by his abused tenant, the legendary populist folk singer, Woody Guthrie. Quote, "I suppose old man Trump knows just how much racial hate he stirred up in the blood pot of human hearts when he drawed that color line here at his 1800 family project." According to David K. Johnston's It's Even Worse Than You Think, Fred Trump's slum tenements got their concrete through New York's 5 families. His mob connections poured a well-laundered 6-figure income to his fortunate son by the time Donald was 6. Raised void of anything resembling empathy, compassion, or common sense, young Donald bonded to Roy Cohn, the infamous mobster shill for Joe McCarthy's witch hunts. Together, they drove Trump's illicit empire into multiple bankruptcies with billions in debt. But in the 1980s and 90s, tattooed gangsters spewed from Stalin's gulag to gorge on the Red Corpse's immense natural wealth. The new mobster billionaires toyed with the CIA's drunken buffoon, Boris Yeltsin. In 1999, Vladimir Putin, the KGB's own made man, took charge. As made clear in Craig Unger's House of Trump, House of Putin, Trump fronted some 1,300 real estate deals that let Russian mobsters launder their rubles into U.S. banks and properties. One mobster punked down some $6 million for 5 condos. Another more than doubled Donald's $40 million ask on a hot Florida property. Trump Tower, 721 Fifth Avenue, became an ex-Soviet safe house. Under extreme duress, Trump laundered mobster rubles into huge cash deals. As Don Jr., his son, explained it in 2008, quote, "In terms of high-end product influx into the U.S., Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets." Close quote. Could he have been more clear? Above all loomed Vladimir, Trump's far tougher and smarter Uber mob boss. As the new Tsar's bagman, there was little the Donald could say or do without Putin's nod. For a peon answering to the Don who owns him. Collusion is a pitiful understatement. Awash in ill-got gains, the Donalds' 3 marriages, 2 to immigrants, and many affairs turned to cheap tabloid trash. Quote, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful, I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab 'em by the pussy. You can do anything. Close quote. Trump's sordid sex life recalled the so-called Sukarno syndrome, named for the Indonesian strongman who pumped his macho image with a CIA orgy tape originally meant to blackmail him. Trump's rigged apprentice let him perfect his Dick Cheney sneer while so-called firing fake supplicants. His unhinged morning tweets diverted the news cycle from all but him. He was a cruel bully, said British commentator Nate White, who had, quote, no class, no charm, no coolness, no credibility, no compassion, no warmth, no wit, no wisdom, no subtlety, no sensitivity, no self-awareness, no humility, no honor, and no grace, unquote. Burdened by no dignity, no truth, common decency, or senses of humor or of honor, Trump became a riveting demagogue. He was embraced by his fellow barons and by a Rust Belt working middle class that was embittered by the vacuous fails of equally uncaring corporate Democrats. Fox was Trump's mighty fortress, his very own Izvestia and Pravda. The all-hate, all-the-time megalith goose-stepped on the grave of the Fairness Doctrine and Clinton-Gore's 1996 Telecommunications Act. In 2019, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren branded Fox, quote, a megaphone for racists and a hate-for-profit racket. Fox let Donald, like a witch-hunting Puritan, tolerate no news but his own. Said he to journalist Leslie Stahl, quote, you know why I attack you? I do it to discredit you all and demean you all. So when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you. Close quote. In 2016, Trump's primary blitzkrieg tore through a pathetic Polish cavalry of 16 bumbling Republicans united in service of the corporate rich. Like any hate-based dictator, Trump gorged on scapegoats. Muslims, immigrants, blacks, Hispanics, LGBTQ, differently abled, demonstrators, journalists, women, all bled on the fascist altar of divide and conquer trash talk. Likewise, the Democrats. While aspiring to lead the nation, Hillary dismissed the unwashed masses as, quote, deplorables, unquote. Her rigged nomination, imperious contempt, and content charisma-free campaign sent countless Sandinistas fleeing to Trump. In return, Donald smeared, quote, crooked Hillary, unquote, and threatened to, quote, lock her up, unquote. He welcomed thuggish violence at his rallies while puking up a steady flow of racist misogyny. The corporate media lapped it up as their ratings soared. They ignored all other candidates, especially Bernie. It was a classic case of be careful what you wish for, said the soon-to-be disgraced Les Moonves of CBS, quote, "The money's rolling in, and this is fun. I've never seen anything like this, and this is going to be a very good year for us. Sorry, it's a terrible thing to say, but bring it on, Donald. Keep going," close quote. In tandem, the GOP used electronic voting machines to flip vote counts on demand. Greg Palast reported that Kansas's white supremacist Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, used Crosscheck to rob voting rights from at least 1 million, mostly of color Democrats, in some 24 key states. Putin's trolls, bots, phishers, rat effers, and other slick saboteurs poured through the internet. Putin's trolls, bots, phishers, rat effers, WikiLeakers, and other sleek saboteurs poured through the internet. The Dems' secret files spewed out everywhere. Various voting machines, databases, at least in Illinois and Florida, and other key parts of the electoral process were mercilessly hacked. After shafting Bernie, the Obama-Clinton corporate New Dems sat mute for yet another theft of our rotted democracy. But Hillary still won the 2016 election. She beat Trump by more than 2.8 million votes. Her nationwide margin of victory was 20 times JFK's in 1960, 6 times Nixon's in 1968, 5 times Gore's in 2000. She won the exit polls in Wisconsin, where she did not campaign, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. Those 5 states would easily have won her the Electoral College. Like Florida 2000 and Ohio 2004, these key states, like others, reeked of serious irregularities that she, like Gore and Kerry, could not be bothered to investigate. But the Green Party did. Green Party candidate Jill Stein, a Boston doctor, ran on all of Bernie's key issues, but she took even stronger stances on imperial spending and war, social justice, gun control, cannabis prohibition, solartopian conversion, election integrity, and more. In the great American grassroots social democrat, populist, socialist, progressive, peace and freedom, Naderite tradition, the Greens sustained indigenous demands for diversity, human rights, economic equality, civil liberties, ecological harmony, and an end to empire. Jill was, of course, marginalized by the corporate media. She and libertarian Gary Johnson, who advocated legal pot but foolishly promised not to smoke it in the White House, were barred from the presidential debates. When interviewed at all, it was about their impact on the vote count, never on what they stood for. Clinton corporatists shrieked, as usual, that all Green ballots were their rightful property. By daring to raise substantial issues, Jill, like Ralph, threatened the Democrats' ordained share of the White House on the Hill. Like 2000 and 2004, the 2016 election hung on stripped registration rolls and flipped vote counts, never challenged by the corporate Democrats. Raising $7 million in small internet donations, Jill and Green Party attorney Robert Fitrakis found that Wisconsin had illegally hid its source codes. Koch-owned Governor Scott Walker used race-based photo ID to strip the voter rolls and flip the state, all without a peep from the corporate Democrats. In Pennsylvania, with a Democrat governor and Secretary of State, rampant precinct-level irregularities were locked down with obscene demands for massive recount fees. In Michigan, which Hillary allegedly lost by about 10,000 votes, Jill found more than 70,000 beheaded ballots. As on indigenous reservations in New Mexico 2004, we were expected to believe that thousands of impassioned Flint and Detroit voters waited hours online to then not mark a choice for president. A Michigan judge agreed with the Green Party that a recount was warranted, but he said it could be granted only to a candidate with a mathematical chance to win. That would be Hillary. Standing in the courtroom, Hillary's lawyers heard the whole thing and then declined to intervene. They were, they said, just there to observe. They could not be bothered with a recount that might well have uncovered exactly the tangible fraud and theft that put Donald Trump in the White House. So for the third time in 5 elections, the new Democrats blew off the faithful millions who'd legitimately won them the Oval Office. The Gore, Kerry, Clinton upper crust let the party's core activists twist in the wind. The result was the Trump autocracy. Unwilling to bother with any kind of challenge to the obvious flip of the 2016 election she had just legitimately won, Hillary Clinton drifted off to walk her dogs, sip Chardonnay, write a caustic memoir, trash, as always, Jill Stein and the Green Party, and enjoy her private fortune. The Trump GOP was now totally free to deepen its gerrymandered, red map death grip on our comatose empire while escalating its deadly rape of American democracy and our Mother Earth. Or so it seemed. Next, the Trumpocalypse. Our imperial vultures come home to roost. In Donald Trump's dreadful swamp, our imperial karma came due. Amidst our Clinton, Gore, Kerry, Shrub, Obama, boomer coma, we were ravaged by poverty and decay. Our food, water, bodies, and ecosphere were debased by a torrent of GMO mutations, toxic chemicals, ubiquitous microplastics, cell phone and cell tower microwaves, reactor radiation, omnipresent glyphosates, general filth, climate chaos, species extinction, and much more. Our infrastructure crumbled. Our obsolete, too-big-to-fail corporations morphed into rotting technosours. We lagged fast-rising juggernauts in Europe and Asia, especially China. The rich-poor gap cratered. Oligarchic income soared orders of magnitude beyond workers' wages. After the Bush-Obama 2007-2009 billionaire banker bailout, nearly every dollar added to America's GNP went to the top 1%. Our heartland was hurt, hammered, and unhinged. Except for the confusing, corporate-friendly Obamacare and his thin, gray stimulus package, no major social program has come to serve our ravaged worker middle class since Vietnam. Clinton, Bush, and Obama won the first set of 3 consecutive two-term presidencies since the Jefferson, Madison, Monroe trifecta in the era of good feelings. But the feelings aroused by this new triple round of two-term presidencies were anything but good. The escalating gap between rich and poor, ubiquitous random gun violence, insane drug war, the endless imperial warfare, and drastically declining ecology all combined to depress our national mood into a sour, angry, Randian swamp of hate, epitomized by a horrifying epidemic of drug overdoses that claimed tens of thousands of mostly young victims every year. After spending $1 trillion to jail 41 million citizens, mostly for pot, our government was amazingly disengaged from an opioid catastrophe that killed so many more. We floundered in the simmering civil wars of race, ethnicity, language, misogyny, sexual preference, class, dignity, civility, you name it. With terrifying regularity, police anywhere and everywhere beat, jailed, and murdered private citizens, mostly of color, for no good reason and without accountability. Voter rolls were stripped by race, income, ethnicity, age. Hacked e-voting machines produced any outcome a local precinct boss might desire. The Electoral College enthroned our biggest losers. After so often slaughtering indigenous peoples and empowering killers and kleptocrats to rob and torture them, our imperial karma returned to roost. As temporarily the world's top superpower, we forever dumped our youth into the usual quagmire, this time in Afghanistan. We squandered our national treasure, financial, moral, geopolitical, spiritual, ecological, as if there were no tomorrow, which might yet prove true. As Abe Lincoln might have put it, quote, 2 centuries of the empire's thuggery demanded that every dollar gouged from the third world would be extorted from us by corporations here at home. Every election stolen abroad would be duplicated in our own precincts. Every drop of blood extracted during our imperial conquests would be shed amidst our own decayed streets, polluted fields, ravaged forests, filthy air, radioactive water. Trump was the karmic lesson, the balloon payment on the empire, living proof that the universe has a sense of both justice and the absurd. As in Game of Thrones, the throne itself was the sickness. As Senator John McCain and others saw it, Trump was the inevitable payback for imperial overreach. He bit with the lecherous, larcenous, lethal venom of CIA-installed beasts like Pinochet, Chile, Castelo Branco, Brazil, Somoza, Nicaragua, Batista, Cuba, the Duvaliers, Haiti, Mobutu, Congo-Zaire, the Greek junta, the Shah, Iran, the Saudis, Saddam Hussein, Iraq, Yeltsin, Putin, Russia, Shinzo Abe, Japan, Ri, Korea, Suharto, Indonesia, Marcos, the Philippines, Pol Pot, Cambodia, Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore, Diem Tu Qui, Vietnam, Noriega, Panama, Alvarado, Honduras, and too many more to list here without risking heart and stomach. All the above butchered, disappeared, or otherwise ousted social democrats and native nationalists in so-called elections rigged by our imperial operatives. They pitilessly pillaged their own people, fellow humans, no different than us, in service to their U.S. corporate masters and personal Swiss bank accounts. Born to the underworld, Trump was their quintessential composite. He conducted himself with all the grace, charm, wisdom, humor, and compassion of a cheap, leering, hollow-eyed street thug. To divide and conquer, Trump puked up the obligatory scapegoats. Hispanics became the targets du jour. Immigrants, like his grandparents, mother, who came here illegally, and wives, became murderers, rapists, drug dealers, bad hombres. Mexico would pay for the border wall. Muslims were so-called terrorists, subject to a travel ban. When neo-Nazis killed Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, Trump praised, quote, both sides as, quote, fine people. Then he retracted that. Then he regretted the retraction. The message was clear, quote, Jews will not replace us, close quote. Trump was the last gasp of the feral, straight, white supremacist, female-fearing, Judeo-Puritan, macho male. A made man gone limp in a world turned upside down. Terrified by the prospect of a diverse, anti-authoritarian, post-fossil nuclear eco-matriarchy, the empire spawned a mutant, small-handed Tyrannosaurus. As of 2016, whites had become a minority in Hawaii and California. Soon to come, Texas, Nevada, New Mexico, the District of Columbia, Florida, and more. By 2050, the new balance will be national. LGBTQ activists threatened the pillars of Puritan sexuality, or lack thereof. Rising so-called others show no signs of melting into a mythological pot. Trump was an uncivil savior with fingers in 3 crumbling dikes: white supremacy, straight male dominance, and fossil nuclear energy. In the material world, his primary masters were America's corporate elite and Putin's mobster oligarchs. Shockingly rude, openly racist, misogynist, malapropic, inept, incompetent, authoritarian, narcissistic, deeply hostile to democracy, humor, and fact, Trump was the ultimate rich boy, a cavalier good fella gone viral. For millions worldwide, the horror wasn't just that this guy was in the White House, but that such a ghastly human could exist at all. The Republican Party, pronounced dead as Obama won the White House and Congress in 2008, morphed into the Trump Party, a mobster cult. The 2016 GOP could claim nothing like common sense, a philosophy, or a heart. The likes of Ike and Lincoln, Teddy and Taft became positively prehistoric. Along with social justice and human diversity, Trump's primary enemy was Mother Earth herself. Facing growing public opposition to the eco-rape that could kill us all, Trump's polluting cronies attacked with all the gusto of a vampire rapist. Donald's job was to create diversionary outrage, divisive chaos, debilitating confusion. At all that, he was exceptionally skillful. For the evangelical Koch Putin corporate imperial elite, Trump delivered what he promised. His high crimes and misdemeanors will fill countless volumes for years to come. The tedious, obscene, mind-numbing list of offenses to formal, moral, and spiritual law metastasizes with every day in office. We've thus relegated the ever-expanding, soul-sickening, detailed list to solartopia.org, where you may add your very own favorites. But simply put, in service to his underworld roots and his corporate masters, including his ruble laundry Russian mob bosses and his globalized fossil nuke overlords, Donald Trump brought the failing American state, along with our ability to survive on this planet, to the brink of the abyss. Born in 1600s Boston, with such stark obsessions and dark prudery, our Puritan DNA left us 4 centuries later in the tiny hands of a petty, sadistic madman. But in 2018, out of the darkness, the indigenous spirit of our original diverse matriarchy, our anti-imperial soul, our tribal love of true community, our natural drive to survive, did strike back. Next and last, getting to Solartopia. Quote, to change something, build a new model that makes the existing one obsolete. Close quote. Buckminster Fuller. Quote, the happy ending is our national belief. Close quote. Mary McCarthy. The millennial rainbow tsunami that blasted into our political system 2016 to 2018 rhymed in sync with the 1960s eruption of the baby boom. It danced with all the prior awakened uprisings of the spiral of our history. It bore in its bones the ultimate accounting with the remnants of our democracy, and with a Mother Earth growing increasingly impatient with our self-destructive madness. The millennials began electing their kin amidst the ghastly chaos of the downbound Trumpocalypse. Their first emissaries to the future were most loudly identified with, quote, the squad, unquote, 4 young women of color elected to the U.S. House in 2018. They were attacked first by Nancy Pelosi and the old line leadership of the corporate Democratic Party, then by Donald Trump in overtly racist terms, quote, go back to where you came from, unquote, at hate-filled 2019 summer rallies where an American wannabe dictator crossed the line deep into the swamp of the overtly fascist. It soon became clear that to save our nation and our species, a revolution in our politics and culture would have to erupt. It would have to come from the 86,500,000 young millennials born from the early 1980s to the early 2000s, willing and able to overwhelm both the corporate Democrats and the Trumpist autocrats. Their boomer predecessors had hugely changed American culture, transcending the Calvinism of our birth, by leaping toward what JFK had called, quote, a world made safe for diversity, unquote. But the curses of class, corporate, imperial dominion, and ecological ruin remained. These would become the millennials' ultimate challenge and the final test of our nation and our species. Martin Luther King's link between racial justice and an end to empire flowed into 1969's uprisings at Stonewall, Woodstock, and Alcatraz. Along with that year's huge moratorium marches, they ignited the era's transcendent, countercultural, indigenous, eco-peacemaker awakening. Jimi Hendrix's 1969 Woodstock anthem still blasts through 1,000 July 4th main streets. Trump was the dying gasp of the white supremacist straight male and the eco-killing fossil nuke corporation. He demanded the dictatorial powers Woodrow Wilson used to crush the radical farm, labor, bohemian, socialist movements a century prior. Nixon enshrined those powers with his Vietnam treason, Kent State murders, and Jim Crow drug war. Reagan and the Bushes deepened them. Clinton and Obama rode their waves. And then came Trump. But in 2018, the U.S. House and many state legislatures were swept by a rejection of all things Puritan and Trumputin. Mentored by Bernie Sanders, the millennials became the biggest potential force in remaking American politics. Diversity was their cutting edge. Nevada got our first majority female state legislature. Colorado got our first openly gay governor. Some 150 LGBTQ candidates won public office. More than 100 women entered Congress, with the first two-time female speaker, the first black females from Massachusetts and Connecticut, the first Texas Latinas, the first two indigenous women joining the first two female Muslims, the first female bisexual senator from Arizona, plus the first female senator from Tennessee and the first female governor of South Dakota, both of them Republicans. A runoff saw the first seriously contending black U.S. Senate candidate from Mississippi since Reconstruction. In 2019, American women, many defiantly gay, won soccer's World Cup, demanding equal pay and a knock on the misogynist in the White House. Notre Dame basketball coach Muffet McGraw knew that this cyclical assault still had light years to go. Quote, "We've had a record number of women running for office and winning, and still we have 23% of the House and 25% of the Senate. I'm getting tired of the novelty of the first female governor of this state, the first female African American mayor of this city. When is it going to become the norm instead of the exception?" End quote. Indeed, the first rightfully elected black female governor of Georgia, Stacey Abrams, was robbed by a white supremacist Jim Crow Secretary of State who, of course, ran his own election and openly stripped and flipped her seat. When Stacey refused to formally concede, she opened a vital new front in the war against election theft and for grassroots democracy. She made it clear after the stolen disasters of 2000, 2004, 2010, and 2016 that the Electoral College 2020 would be won in a precinct-by-precinct trench war, rooted in stripped voter rolls, flipped vote counts, and massive race, class-based megatheft in all the long-planned, carefully rehearsed, well-funded variations. After all, a gumbo culture is one thing. An iron-fisted, class-based, corporate imperial, planet-killing global empire is very much another, although they may not be mutually exclusive. Calvinist, greed-based dominance on a global scale is our ultimate curse. Our nation and our species cries out in the maw of a metastasized autocracy, obsessed with nothing but money. It is endowed with human rights, but no human or ecological accountability, and we all pay the price. The U.S. may be the richest nation on earth, but half of us live in grinding poverty. Our children are hungry, like those starved, tortured, and killed at our southern border. Our working middle class is shackled with low pay on top of student, medical, credit card, and too much other debt. We are a paycheck or an illness away from bankruptcy, homelessness, destitution. We can't raise $400 to face a family emergency. There are 60,000 homeless in Los Angeles, 500,000 nationwide. The so-called other America has become our daily ordinary. A century since its illegal Red Scare enthronement, the two-party duopoly chokes the power of progressive healing. The evil of two lessers, the cynical triangulation that locks true social change out of the electoral rubric, curses our evolution. Approaching 2020, the corporate Democrat gerontocracy plays its traditional symbiotic game with the Trumpocracy it led into power. So-called New Democrat Bill Clinton failed to deliver systemic change. Al Gore and John Kerry won the presidency, but walked away. Barack Obama failed to deliver systemic change. Hillary Clinton won the presidency, but walked away. None took on an electoral system defined by vote stripping, tally flipping, and a slave-based electoral college. With no real ideological opposition, the GOP became the personal sidearm of a narcissistic psychopath whose mob roots stretched from the Queens to the Kremlin. The illness is global. In the age of the internet, our physical isolation is an anachronism. The American spiral, as originally conceived, has been absorbed into a global being. The danger we face comes from no foreign military. It is bound up with species extinction, most notably our own, born of climate chaos, toxic pollution, atomic error, obscene overconsumption, social injustice, racial caste, debilitating poverty, gender hostility, kleptocratic dominion, the dictatorial poisons of incompetent arrogance and imperial violence. Trump became the ultimate symbol and symptom. But a species that spends so much to kill its own and destroy its only home will ultimately get exactly what it pays for. For millennials, it became clear that if they were not the first generation to remake our global society, they would be the last. Koyaanisqatsi, Hopi for life out of balance, has become humankind's death of nature reckoning. It means the polarized, poisoned, plasticized, microwaved, irradiated, overheated abyss of existential extinction. We are out of time and space. The spiral of our history is done. The atomic clock is set to tick on without us. But for every sickness, nature provides a holistic cure. We can clean our filthy, carbonized air by planting 1 trillion trees. We can cool our earth by dousing the fires of King Kong, coal, oil, nukes, and gas, and by going 100% to renewables, which are ready and available. Green power, organic agriculture, reborn hemp, biosubstitutes for plastics and packaging, an end to glyphosate, a whole new way of manufacturing, communicating, and doing business. All are within our grasp. At the peak of the arc of justice, all empires, including our so-called exceptional city on the hill, must end in history's compost heap. Curing our military madness preserves the resources needed to fairly feed, house, educate, clothe, and heal us all. Doing so defines us as human. Failing dooms us. Throughout our human spiral, new awakenings always arise. Back and forth, they bang against our Puritan death wish. A whole new way of thinking now demands our patriarchal techno-genius at last make peace with our matriarchal soul. Warns Oren Lyons, the Haudenosaunee faith keeper, quote, "Nature has no mercy, none," unquote. Mother Nature asks us but one question. Does a species that tortures its own while trashing its only home and wasting its life force on weapons and greed really deserve to live? What need could there be for such a creature in the universal womb? We have all the tools we need to survive and thrive. But do we have the grace, compassion, humility, and wisdom to evolve in the nick of time and use those tools to shape a just, sustainable, solartopian future? It'll be a very close call, and how it goes is up to you. Mitakwe Oyasin.